Humans were resurrected as weapons, but one broke free. The night was cold, and the city was cloaked in shadows, its towering skyscrapers casting dark silhouettes against the sky. Arin Kael, a decorated special officer, walked briskly through the narrow alleyways, his senses heightened. He had a gut feeling that something was wrong, something that he couldn't quite put his finger on. But before he could make sense of his growing unease, a shadow lunged at him from the darkness. "Arin Kael, we finally have you," a voice hissed through the silence. He barely had time to react before the first blow landed a sharp strike to his chest, followed by another to his side. Arin staggered, the pain searing through his body as he fell to his knees. His vision blurred, but not before he saw the dark figures surrounding him, agents of the underground organization. His enemies, the ones who had been silently manipulating the world for years. He had always been a thorn in their side, and now they were going to silence him for good. The leader of the group stepped forward, his face concealed beneath a mask. "You've been a problem, Arin. Too much of a threat, but now it ends." Arin struggled to breathe, his body growing weaker with each passing second. He had been the one to expose their operations, the one who had been relentlessly hunting them down. But now his time was up. "Why me?" Arin gasped, his voice barely audible. The leader's eyes glinted with cold amusement. "Because you're the only one who could stop us. And now you won't." With one final brutal strike, Arin's world went dark. He woke up in an unfamiliar place, cold, sterile, the air thick with the scent of chemicals. His eyes flickered open, and for a moment he could barely comprehend where he was. The room was dimly lit, and machines beeped around him in rhythmic intervals. His body felt different. He tried to move, but his limbs felt heavier than usual. There was an unsettling sense of power coursing through his veins, but it was mixed with a foreign, alien sensation that made him feel detached from himself. "What happened?" Arin muttered to himself, his voice raspy and unfamiliar. He attempted to sit up, only to be met with a sharp pain in his chest. His eyes scanned his surroundings, and that's when he saw it. The small tube embedded in his arm, an intravenous line connected to a large machine. The door opened, and a figure stepped into the room, a scientist, his face cold and impassive. "You're awake," the scientist said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "The procedure was successful." "You're different now." Arin's mind raced. Procedure. What procedure? He tried to speak, but his thoughts were jumbled. A faint memory flickered in his mind, a flash of dark figures, the feel of cold steel as it pierced his flesh, and the final sensation of slipping away. He had been dead, but now he was alive. Or was he? "What did you do to me?" Arin's voice was stronger now, demanding answers. His heart pounded in his chest. The scientist seemed unfazed. "You were part of an experiment, Arin. The underground organization needed someone like you, someone capable of great things. We brought you back. Better than before." Arin's breath hitched. "What do you mean by better?" The scientist ignored his question. "You're more than just a man now. You're a weapon, and you have a purpose." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Don't worry, your memories will return. It's just a matter of time." The door clicked shut, leaving Arin alone with his thoughts. Weapon? He wasn't a weapon. He was a person, a soldier, yes, but not a tool for someone else's bidding. His mind was a mess, fragments of memories, feelings, and sensations colliding in a chaotic storm. He could feel the unnatural strength in his muscles, the speed in his reflexes. But there was something off, something wrong. His fingers brushed against the scars on his skin, the faint remnants of the wounds from his previous life. They seemed different now, more pronounced. The marks of an experiment, the marks of someone who had been altered. His eyes darted around the room, trying to grasp at anything familiar, but nothing made sense. As the days passed, Arin tried to make sense of his situation. The scientist had told him the truth, or at least part of it. He was alive, yes, but at what cost? His memories were fractured, and the more he searched his mind for clarity, the more he realized that there were gaps, huge holes that didn't belong. "I remember," he whispered one night, sitting in front of a mirror, his reflection staring back at him with cold indifference. "I remember my life before all this. But when he reached for the memories, they slipped away like sand through his fingers. Faces, names, events all became blurry. He had been someone once, but who? And why couldn't he remember? Weeks passed, and with each passing day, Arin grew more and more aware of the terrifying reality the organization hadn't just brought him back to life. They had manipulated his very essence, tampering with his memories, rewriting his past. He wasn't sure what was real anymore. "Are they my memories?" Arin muttered to himself one night, standing at the edge of his bed, staring into the dark. He closed his eyes tightly, hoping to recall something concrete. Or are they just things they planted? His fingers dug into the sides of his head, as if he could pull the truth out of his skull. But nothing came, just fragments. It was clear now. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a weapon, and the organization had shaped him into whatever they needed him to be. But the truth lingered just out of reach, a nagging suspicion that told him everything he knew, everything he thought he knew was a lie. "I'll find out," he said quietly to the darkness, a determination hardening in his chest. "I'll find out the truth. And when I do," his hands clenched into fists, "I'll make them pay." Arin woke up in a small, dimly lit room, his thoughts still hazy from the bizarre events that had unfolded. His body felt like it had been put through the ringer, and the confusion clouded his mind. As he sat on the edge of the cot trying to gather himself, the door creaked open, revealing a tall figure silhouetted in the doorway. The woman who entered was unlike anyone Arin had ever seen. Her long silver hair cascaded down her back, her skin a pale shade of blue, and her eyes glowed with an unnatural golden hue. Her presence was commanding, and yet she moved with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly. "You must be Arin Kael," she said, her voice calm but assertive. "I've been waiting for you to wake up." Arin's instincts flared up, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon hidden at his side. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough with suspicion. "And how do you know my name?" The woman's lips curled into a faint smile. "My name is Valen Rask, and I know much more than just your name, Arin. I know about the organization that has been pulling your strings." Arin's eyes narrowed. "The organization," he repeated. "What do you know about them?" Valen took a step forward, her golden eyes locking with his. "I know that they've been manipulating you just as they've been manipulating me and my people. They've been pulling the strings not just on you, but on entire worlds. Your fight is far from over." Arin stood up, his body tense. "And what makes you think I want your help?" he asked, his suspicion thick in his voice. Valen's gaze softened. "Because you don't have much of a choice. The same people who brought you back to life have been doing the same thing to others, including my people. I've been fighting them for years. I know the enemy, and I can help you bring them down." Arin studied her, unsure of whether to trust her. Her alien appearance was unlike anything he'd ever seen, but the conviction in her eyes was undeniable. She wasn't like the others, he could feel that. But the question remained, why should he trust her? "You're from another planet, aren't you?" Arin asked, his curiosity growing despite himself. Valen nodded slowly. "I come from a world far from here. My people were once free, thriving under the stars, but the organization infiltrated us, controlled our leaders, and slowly enslaved our civilization. They did to us what they did to you, twisted our minds and used us as pawns in their game." Arin felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "So you're saying they've done this to other worlds? Other species?" he asked, the weight of the realization sinking in. "Yes," Valen replied, her voice tinged with bitterness. "They've infiltrated countless worlds, bending them to their will. And I've spent my life trying to free my people from their control. But I can't do it alone. I need your help, Arin." Arin's mind raced. The implications of her words were staggering. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about an intergalactic conspiracy. And somewhere in the midst of it all, he was nothing more than a tool in their hands. "You were brought back by them, weren't you?" Valen asked, her voice softer now, as if she could see the confusion in his eyes. "They did the same to me. They don't just kill, they resurrect, they control. And now we fight to take it all back." Arin felt a surge of anger, but it was quickly replaced by a deep sense of unease. "So you know about the experiment they did on me, how they brought me back?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Valen nodded grimly. "I know exactly what they've done to you. They've used you just as they've used me. But we're not just victims, Arin. We're the key to ending them. Arin felt the weight of her words. I don't know if I can trust you, he muttered, his voice tight with frustration. For all I know, you could be working for them. For all I know, you're just another puppet. Valen's eyes softened with understanding. I don't expect you to trust me right away. I understand why you're cautious. But you need to understand something, Arin. We're in this together. We can take down the organization, but only if we stand united. He looked at her, his mind torn. He had no answers, no real sense of who to trust. But Valen was right about one thing. He didn't have much choice. All right, he said, his voice firm. Let's say I do trust you. What's the plan? Valen's lips curled into a small smile. First, we need to gather information. The organization has a stronghold on this planet, but they're also spread out across the galaxy. They've been running things from the shadows for far too long. If we're going to bring them down, we need to start by uncovering everything they've hidden. Arin nodded. Let's start then. We have a lot of work to do. As they made their way out of the small room, Arin couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to Valen's past than she was letting on. She had a reason to fight the organization, but what if her reasons weren't as pure as she made them seem? What if there were things she wasn't telling him? His doubts lingered, but for now he had no choice but to trust her. They were in this together, for better or for worse. But as they ventured deeper into the unknown, Arin couldn't help but wonder how much of what Valen had told him was the truth. The darkness ahead was filled with unanswered questions, and Arin had no idea where the path would lead. The air in the small room was heavy with tension as Arin and Valen pored over the decrypted message they had just received. The code had been complex, yet Valen's sharp skills had cracked it open, revealing something both shocking and critical. A piece of intelligence that could potentially tear apart everything they thought they knew. It's here, Valen said, her voice low as she scanned the message, her eyes widening with realization. The underground organization. They're planning something bigger than we anticipated. This is the final stage of their plan. Arin leaned over her shoulder, his breath shallow. What does it say? It's a project, she explained, pointing to a set of coordinates. A facility deep underground where they've been gathering resources and preparing a weapon. A weapon that could change the balance of power across the entire galaxy. Her voice dropped to a whisper, as if even saying it out loud could make it real. They're close to activating it. Arin clenched his fist, the anger simmering within him. We have to stop them, he said, his words like fire. We can't let them get away with this. But something in the back of his mind kept gnawing at him. He knew the organization. They were cunning, manipulative, and they played a game with no rules. This could be a trap, he said, his voice laced with suspicion. It's too easy, too convenient. They've been tracking us at every turn. Why would they give us this information now? Valen met his gaze with a sharp look. Because they want us to come. They know we're getting closer to the truth. This could be exactly what they want, a final confrontation. Arin's eyes narrowed. They're trying to lead us to the slaughter. Valen's expression was grim. We can't ignore it, though. If we do, they could launch this weapon before we even know what hit us. But we'll need to be careful. If it is a trap, we're walking right into the lion's den. The decision weighed heavily on them, but they knew that this was their only lead. If they didn't act, they would be walking blind into a war that the organization would win before it even began. Hours later, Arin and Valen stood in front of a hidden underground facility, the very place the message had pointed to. It was eerily quiet, the cold steel of the structure looming above them like an unspoken threat. The place felt like a ghost town, as if it had been abandoned for years. But Arin knew better. This silence was a facade hiding the chaos that had been brewing underneath. How do we get in? Arin asked, scanning the perimeter. There were no guards in sight, no security forces lurking in the shadows, just empty walls and distant echoes. Valen's eyes narrowed. There's an access point hidden in the west wing. We'll need to slip past the security grid. But keep your guard up. The organization doesn't leave things unprotected for long. Arin could feel the weight of the moment. They were stepping into the heart of the enemy's lair, and he wasn't sure what awaited them. But they had no choice now. As they entered the facility, the oppressive sense of danger grew with every step. They moved silently, each sound they made seeming like an alarm in the dead silence. Arin's mind raced. He knew they had to find the data, the evidence that could prove the organization's plans once and for all. But something else was bothering him, the feeling that they weren't alone. "Stay close," Valen murmured, her hand resting on the hilt of her weapon. She was alert, ready for anything. "They'll know we're here soon enough." No sooner had she spoken than the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Arin's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just one pair of feet. There were more closing in on them quickly. "Run!" Arin shouted, his voice hoarse with urgency. Without a second thought, they sprinted down the hallway, the sound of pursuing footsteps growing louder behind them. The facility that once seemed like an abandoned structure was now a deadly maze, and Arin and Valen were the hunted. "We can't outrun them forever." Valen gritted her teeth, her breath coming in quick bursts as she pushed herself faster. "They've got the latest tracking tech. They'll catch us if we don't find a way out." The walls around them flickered as they passed the security lights blinking on and off. It was clear now they weren't just being chased. The organization was activating every system at their disposal to lock them in. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the doors began to seal behind them. "Left!" Arin shouted, grabbing Valen's arm and pulling her down a side corridor. They turned the corner just in time as a security turret above them activated, sending a stream of plasma bolts into the hallway. Arin barely managed to duck in time, his heart pounding in his chest. "We need to get to the control room," he said through gritted teeth, his voice tight. "We can't let them lock us in here." Valen nodded, the urgency in her eyes matching his. "We'll have to get past the security grid first," she said, already sizing up the path ahead. As they ran, Arin could feel the weight of their situation pressing down on him. The organization was relentless, their pursuit never-ending. They had to outsmart them, and quickly. But with each step, Arin's mind kept circling back to one disturbing thought. How did they know exactly where we'd be? The answer came to him slowly, like a creeping dread. There was a mole in their ranks. Someone within their own group was feeding information to the organization. The feeling of betrayal gnawed at him, but he couldn't let it distract him. Not now. "Valen, we need to hurry," Arin said, his voice growing more urgent. "I don't trust anyone anymore." Valen's gaze locked onto his. "I don't either, Arin, but right now we have to focus on getting out of here alive." They pushed forward, the sounds of pursuit getting closer. The walls around them seemed to close in, but they couldn't stop, not now. Not when they were so close to finding the truth about the organization, and the traitor in their midst. Arin's head spun as the full extent of the underground organization's plans began to unravel before him. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. He and Valen stood in a darkened room, a map of intergalactic facilities projected on a screen before them, each one marked with the same insignia, the underground organization symbol. "What is this?" Arin asked, his voice strained as he stared at the screen. Valen's eyes were hard as she read through the documents they had just uncovered. "This isn't just about control or power," she said, her voice low. "They've been using you, Arin. You were never meant to live a normal life. You were created to be a weapon." Arin's breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean?" he asked, his heart racing. "The organization has been experimenting with advanced biological techniques. You were part of their plan to create enhanced soldiers, humans capable of surviving impossible conditions, fighting battles in ways that others cannot. They saw potential in you, Arin. That's why they brought you back." He staggered back, his mind racing. "A weapon." He could barely say the word. "But why me? Why bring me back only to turn me into this thing?" Valen turned to him, her expression serious. "Because you're not just a soldier. You're the perfect specimen for them. They didn't just resurrect you for the sake of having a weapon. They wanted you to be their ultimate tool to be used in wars that could reshape the galaxy. You were never supposed to have free will." The words hit Arin like a blow to the chest. His mind reeled with the implications. Every moment of his life, every victory, every decision he had made, it all felt hollow now. He had been nothing but a cog in their machine. His resurrection had been their doing, and now he was faced with the terrifying reality that he might never be able to break free from their control. "Can I even escape this?" he whispered to himself. "Can I still be my own person, or am I nothing more than their puppet?" His voice cracked, and for a moment he felt his resolve falter. Valen placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch a reminder of the fight they still had ahead. "You can escape, Arin," she said firmly, "but you'll have to face what they've done to you. You've been trained for this fight even if you don't realize it yet. You can take back control, but only if you confront them head-on." Arin looked at her, his mind torn between the man he had been and the weapon they had turned him into. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden beep from the terminal. It was a new message this time from an encrypted channel. Arin and Valen exchanged a glance before opening it. The message was short, but the contents were enough to send a chill down their spines. "The traitor is among you. The time to strike is now." Valen's face went pale as she read the message, and Arin's heart sank. He could see the realization dawning on her face. "It's him," she said, her voice tight with disbelief. "I can't believe it." Arin's confusion deepened. "Who a close ally?" Valen explained, her tone low. "Someone I've trusted for years. He's been feeding information to the organization. He's the one who's been orchestrating everything from the inside." Arin's jaw clenched as he processed this information. "You've been betrayed?" His voice was tinged with disbelief. "By someone you knew?" Valen nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "Yes, I never saw it coming. It's why they've been so one step ahead of us." She paused, a grim look crossing her face. "I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore." Arin placed a hand on her arm, his eyes steady. "We'll deal with this together. But first we need to focus on stopping their plan. If we're going to stop them, we need to do it now. We can't let this betrayal throw us off course." Valen met his gaze, her expression hardening. "You're right. But this changes everything. If he's in on this, then we have no idea how deep the organization's roots go." The weight of the situation bore down on both of them. They had known the organization was powerful, but the revelation of a mole in their ranks made it clear just how insidious the threat was. And now a new horror loomed ahead. What they had uncovered about the organization's ultimate plan was more terrifying than anything they could have imagined. "Arin, this isn't just about us anymore," Valen said, her voice low and serious. "We've uncovered their endgame. They've been creating a weapon of mass destruction, a device that could annihilate entire star systems. They've been testing it, perfecting it, and now they're ready to deploy it." Arin's blood ran cold as he processed her words. "A weapon that could wipe out entire worlds. They're planning genocide on a galactic scale." Valen nodded. "If we don't stop them, it's all over. This weapon could change the entire power structure of the galaxy, and we'll be powerless to stop it if we don't act quickly." Arin's fist clenched. "Then we have no time to waste." The clock was ticking, and they both knew it. They had no more room for error. Every step they took now would either bring them closer to saving everything they had fought for, or lead them into a final devastating confrontation with the organization. "There's one more thing," Valen added, her voice grave. "We still don't know exactly where the weapon is being stored. The organization has been very careful to hide its location. But this next move, it could give us the last piece of the puzzle." Arin nodded, determination filling him once again. "We'll find it. We'll stop them, and we'll make sure they can never hurt anyone again." They had come too far to stop now. The battle was only beginning, but Arin and Valen were ready to face the full wrath of the underground organization, even if it meant uncovering more painful truths about their pasts along the way. Arin and Valen stood at the edge of the massive facility, their hearts pounding as they prepared for the inevitable confrontation. The underground organization had been pushing them to this point, and now standing in front of the heavily guarded entrance, they both knew that there was no turning back. They were about to face the highest-ranking officer within the organization, a man whose power and influence could rival entire armies. "You ready?" Arin asked, his voice low but determined as he adjusted the weapon in his hands. His mind was a blur of thoughts, doubts, fears, but also a burning need for vengeance. Valen nodded, her eyes cold with focus. "As ready as we'll ever be. He's not just any officer. He's the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. If we want to take down the organization, we have to deal with him first." The door ahead opened with a heavy mechanical groan, revealing a large, dimly lit room. At the center of it stood a figure, a tall man dressed in a dark military uniform, the insignia of the underground organization emblazoned on his chest. His eyes were hidden beneath the shadow of a hood, but there was no mistaking the authority in his stance. "You've come," the man said, his voice smooth and cold. "I've been waiting for you both." Arin clenched his fist, stepping forward. You're the one behind all of this. The one responsible for everything we've been through. The man gave a soft chuckle, his voice carrying an eerie calmness. Yes, I am. But I'm not the only one. You see, Arin, this game we've been playing, it's much bigger than you think. Your resurrection, your rebirth as a weapon, it was all part of the plan. Valen's eyes narrowed. A weapon, is that all we are to you? Just tools to be used and discarded? The man's smile widened, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. Not tools, Valen. Weapons, yes. But more importantly, instruments of a much larger vision. You've been so focused on the details you've failed to see the bigger picture. The galaxy is on the brink of a new era, and you, both of you, are merely pawns in the game. Arin's blood ran cold. A new era. What are you planning? He demanded. The man's expression darkened, and he stepped forward, the air around him seeming to shift with the weight of his power. I've been grooming leaders, experimenting with the very fabric of life itself. You and Valen are the perfect examples of what humanity or any species really could become. Stronger, smarter, deadlier. And once my plan is complete, you will both see the future I've promised. Valen's hand tightened around her weapon, her gaze unwavering. We'll stop you, she said coldly. We'll expose your plan to the galaxy. You'll never get away with this. The man raised an eyebrow, seemingly unbothered. You think you can stop me? I've anticipated every move you've made, every step you've taken. Do you really think this is the end? No, Valen. This is just the beginning. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the room was plunged into darkness. Arin and Valen instinctively took fighting stances, knowing they had just walked into the trap the man had set for them. The sound of mechanical whirring filled the air, and out of the shadows the enemy's elite soldiers emerged, each one more advanced than the last. This is your fate, the man's voice echoed from the shadows as his soldiers advanced toward Arin and Valen. You will fall just like the rest. The battle began in an instant. Arin and Valen fought fiercely, but the enemy soldiers were not just skilled. They were enhanced, modified with the same biological experiments the organization had used on them. The fight was brutal, every moment a test of their strength and will. Arin felt his strength pushing him to the edge, the power within him, from the experiments driving him forward, but also making him question the very nature of his existence. The battle raged on, and in the midst of it, the man's voice cut through the chaos. You were never meant to be free, Arin. I know everything about you. Your memories, your thoughts, they were all crafted by me. Arin froze. What are you talking about? He shouted. The man stepped forward, his voice growing more sinister. You think you're a hero, that you've been fighting for justice? No, Arin. You're a weapon I designed to fight for my cause. Your memories, your purpose, everything you've ever known was a lie. You were never meant to be anything more than a tool. The shock hit Arin like a physical blow. No, that's not possible, he whispered as the weight of the truth began to crush him. My life, my choices, everything I did, it was all for nothing. Nothing, the man said with a cruel smirk. You're nothing but a product of my design, a perfect weapon for my perfect world. Arin's vision blurred, his hands trembling, as he realized the depth of his betrayal. The fight around him seemed to fade, replaced by the suffocating weight of his past. His entire existence, his purpose, had been nothing more than an experiment. Arin, focus! Valen's voice snapped him out of his daze, but the man's words lingered in his mind, gnawing at him. Could he continue fighting? Could he still trust in his own will after everything he had learned? Get up, Arin, Valen shouted as she took down another enemy soldier. We have to stop this. We can't let him win. But Arin hesitated. How could he keep fighting when everything he had fought for was a lie? As if sensing his inner conflict, the man smiled. You're weak, Arin. You always were. You've spent your life thinking you were the hero, but you were just a cog in my machine. Valen's voice was sharp. We're not giving up. You won't break us. Arin looked at her, the fire in her eyes reigniting something deep inside him. He couldn't let the man win. He couldn't let this betrayal define him. Valen's words echoed in his mind as he gritted his teeth, his resolve hardening once again. You may have created me, but I am not your weapon. With a roar, he lunged at the man, ready to finish this once and for all. As the battle continued, Arin and Valen realized the full scope of the underground organization's plans. It wasn't just about them anymore. It wasn't just about taking down one man or one weapon. It was a global war waiting to erupt, and they had no choice but to stop it. "We need to stop the launch," now Valen said through gritted teeth as the realization hit them like a shockwave. "This is bigger than we thought." They had to face the truth. The organization wasn't just after them. They were after an entire galaxy, and Arin and Valen were the only ones who could prevent the catastrophic war from tearing it apart. "Can we stop it in time?" Arin asked, breathless from the battle, his mind still grappling with the revelation. Valen didn't answer immediately. "We have no choice. We stop them or we lose everything." As the weight of the situation sank in, they knew the stakes were higher than ever. The final battle had just begun. The room was dark, the hum of machinery in the background almost soothing compared to the chaos that had consumed their lives. Arin stood in front of the war room's map, his mind a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and doubt. His thoughts kept circling back to the message he had received just hours before a new ally. Someone who claimed to have once been a part of the underground organization. Valen stood across from him, her arms crossed, a mixture of skepticism and curiosity in her eyes. "I don't know how I feel about this," she said, breaking the silence. "Someone who used to work for them, and now suddenly they want to help us. It's hard to trust that, Arin." Arin stared at the map, his jaw set in determination. "I don't trust him either, but we need every advantage we can get. We've been walking blind for too long. We can't afford to turn away help just because it comes from someone who's been on the other side." Valen's eyes softened, but only slightly. "You're right. But what if he's still working for them? What if this is just another trap?" Arin clenched his fists, a deep sense of unease clawing at him. "I'm not sure, but we don't have time to waste." He looked at her, meeting her gaze with quiet conviction. "We're running out of options, Valen. We need to make a choice." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the decision hanging over them like a storm cloud. Finally, Valen spoke. "Let's hear him out. But if anything feels off, we pull back. No more risks." The door to the room slid open with a hiss and a man entered. He was tall, with a lean frame and sharp features that looked all too familiar to Arin. His eyes were dark, but the moment they met Arin's, there was something in them that hinted at regret, guilt, and perhaps hope. "Arin," the man said, his voice low and measured. "Valen." Arin's heart skipped a beat. "Caleb." He almost couldn't believe it. Caleb had been one of his closest allies, a fellow soldier in the organization, before he disappeared. Everyone had assumed he was dead, another casualty of the underground's dark schemes. Caleb nodded, his expression somber. "I'm sorry. I didn't think I'd ever have to come back like this." Valen eyed him warily. "What are you doing here, Caleb? You're supposed to be dead." Caleb's gaze hardened. "I was. Or at least that's what they made you all believe. But I got out. I had to." Arin felt a flood of questions rush to his lips, but he kept them in check. "What do you want from us? You betrayed your own people. You betrayed me." Caleb's face fell, his guilt evident. "I didn't have a choice, Arin. The organization, it's more than you think. I was just a cog in their machine. I thought I could fight back, but they always had more control over me than I realized. When I saw what they were doing to you, what they were turning you into, I knew I had to get out. I couldn't let them use you like that." Valen was silent for a long moment before speaking. "You say you want to help us, but how do we know you're not lying? You could be here to lead us straight into their hands." Caleb sighed heavily. "I get it. You don't trust me, and you have every right not to. But I'm not your enemy, Valen. I never wanted to be a part of their plan. Now I'm here because I want to make things right. I can help you stop them, but we have to move fast." Arin stood silently, torn between his desire for answers and the suspicion that gnawed at him. Caleb's words struck a chord, but something felt off. It wasn't just the betrayal that clouded his thoughts. It was the strange sense of familiarity that Caleb's presence invoked. Could he really be trusted, or was this another lie spun by the organization to manipulate him? "How can we trust you?" Arin asked finally, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Caleb looked at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and resolve. Because I'm the one who knows where their power lies. I know their plans. I know how they've been manipulating you and everyone else, and I can help you bring it all down if you'll let me." There was a long silence as Arin processed his words. The weight of Caleb's confession hung heavy in the air. There was no denying it, Caleb's knowledge was invaluable. But could he truly trust someone who had once been a part of the organization that had torn apart his life? Valen's voice broke through the silence. "We don't have time to debate this. We have to move. If Caleb really wants to help, then we use him. But we watch him closely. If he betrays us again, I'll be the first to deal with it." Arin nodded slowly. "Agreed." With that, their uneasy alliance with Caleb was forged. But the suspicion lingered. They didn't know if Caleb was truly an ally or if he was just another tool in the organization's twisted game. But they had no choice now. The next few hours were spent preparing for their next move. Caleb provided crucial information about the organization's plans, revealing the locations of key bases and supply depots. He was clear in his intentions. He wanted to see the organization fall as much as Arin and Valen did. But still, Arin couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. There was something in Caleb's eyes that didn't sit right with him. As the trio made their way toward the underground facility that housed critical information about the organization's final weapon, the tension was palpable. Caleb guided them through secure corridors and hidden passageways, each step bringing them closer to their goal and closer to the heart of the organization's power. When they reached the control center, Caleb instructed them on how to disable the facility's security systems. Arin and Valen worked in unison, but there was an unease in the air. The facility's cold, sterile walls felt like they were closing in on them. Every moment felt like a countdown to disaster. "All right," Arin said, wiping the sweat from his brow. "We're in. Now we need to find the main control room and shut down their operations." Caleb nodded but paused for a moment, looking over his shoulder. "There's just one problem. The organization knows we're here." Arin's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" Before Caleb could respond, the alarms blared, filling the room with a shrill, ear-piercing noise. Red lights flashed in time with the blaring sirens. "They've triggered the lockdown," Caleb muttered, a hint of panic in his voice. "We're trapped." The door to the control room slid shut with a heavy thud, and soldiers began to flood into the hall. Arin and Valen barely had time to react before the first wave of combatants crashed into the room. "Get ready!" Valen yelled, drawing her weapon. The ensuing battle was fierce as waves of heavily armed soldiers descended upon them. Despite their preparation, Arin and Valen were caught off guard by the sheer number of enemies. Caleb surprisingly held his own, his knowledge of the facility and its defenses proving invaluable. But it wasn't long before cracks began to appear. As the battle raged on, Caleb's movements began to slow, his breathing more labored. Arin noticed his suspicion growing. Something was wrong. "Caleb, what's going on?" Arin shouted over the noise of gunfire. Caleb's eyes flickered with something that resembled fear. I didn't know they'd activate this kind of response. I thought we could shut down the security." Before Caleb could finish, one of the soldiers landed a blow to his side, sending him crashing to the ground. Arin's heart raced. The suspicion that had been building in him now felt like a concrete weight. Had Caleb been the one to set them up? Had he led them into a trap from the beginning? Valen was there in an instant, pulling Caleb to his feet. "We don't have time for this, Arin. We need to keep moving." But Arin wasn't so sure anymore. The cracks in Caleb's story were wide open now. The tension between him and Valen was palpable. She was still focused on the mission, but Arin couldn't shake the feeling that they were losing their grip on what had been a solid plan. "Let's finish this," Arin said, his voice cold, his trust in Caleb hanging by a thread. As they fought their way through the facility, the mists of betrayal, suspicion, and uncertainty surrounded them. They had come for the truth. But in doing so, they had unleashed a deadly conflict, one that threatened not just their lives, but the future of the galaxy itself. The room was silent, save for the hum of the equipment around them. Arin and Valen stood facing each other, the weight of their conversation pressing down on them like a storm. The final stages of their battle with the underground organization were upon them, but there was one last decision. They needed to make a decision that would define not only their fates, but the fate of everyone else who had been caught in the crossfire of this war. Arin could feel the tension building in his chest, the sense that everything was about to come to a head. He had fought so long, so hard to stop the organization. But now, standing at the precipice of victory, he realized that it wasn't just about taking down the enemy. The cost of winning would be greater than he had ever imagined. "I'm the only one who can end this," Arin said, his voice firm, but filled with an undercurrent of sadness. "We've come too far, Valen. I know what I have to do." Valen's heart sank as she watched him. She had always known Arin was strong, determined to the point of being reckless. But this was different. This wasn't just about taking down an enemy. This was about losing him. "Arin, no," she pleaded, stepping closer to him. "You don't have to do this. There has to be another way." He shook his head, his eyes filled with a deep sorrow that she hadn't seen in him before. "I wish there was, but there isn't. The organization has too much power. I'm the only one who can get close enough to destroy their final weapon. If I don't, it'll all be for nothing. Everything we fought for will be wiped out." Valen reached out, her fingers brushing against his arm, her grip tight, as if she could stop him from making this choice. "I can't lose you, Arin. You can't just throw your life away like this. We've come this far together, don't you see? You don't have to sacrifice yourself for us." But Arin was resolute. "I have to, Valen. You know it. I'm the only one who can get in. The rest of you will be safe. I won't let them use us anymore." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the pain he felt in making this decision. "This is my fight, my responsibility. You've done more than enough. Let me do this." Valen's heart shattered at the sight of the man she had come to care for so deeply, the man who had fought beside her, sacrificed so much. She knew that Arin was right, that he had always carried the weight of this war on his shoulders. But this was something else entirely. "Don't make me watch you die," Valen said, her voice barely above a whisper, a crack in her usually unshakable resolve. "Please, Arin. We're stronger together." Arin placed his hand on hers, his grip firm yet gentle. "I've already made my decision, and if I have to die to stop them, then that's what I'll do. You'll carry on the fight. You'll finish what we started." The finality in his voice made Valen's heart ache. She wanted to argue, to tell him there had to be another way, but deep down she knew there wasn't. She had seen the same dark determination in his eyes that had driven him from the very beginning. He wasn't going to back down, and though she hated it, she couldn't stop him. "I won't let your sacrifice be in vain," she said quietly, her voice filled with resolve. "But I will carry on your legacy, Arin. I promise you that." The weight of his decision hung in the air as they both turned to face the battlefield ahead. There was no turning back now. They had to finish this. The hours that followed were a blur of preparation and tension. Arin, Valen, and their allies gathered for the final assault on the underground organization's headquarters, where the weapon that could destroy everything lay waiting. The plan was simple. Arin would infiltrate the heart of the facility, disable the security systems, and destroy the weapon. The others would provide a distraction, holding off the organization's forces long enough to allow him to carry out the mission. But even as they prepared, Valen couldn't shake the fear that gripped her. She watched Arin, knowing that this might be the last time she would ever see him. She knew what he was about to do, and yet the thought of losing him seemed unbearable. As they moved out, Valen stayed close to him, her eyes constantly searching for any sign of hesitation. But Arin was a man on a mission now, his focus sharp, his steps determined. He had already made peace with his decision, and though it tore at her, she knew she had to respect it. "Stay safe," Valen said to him one last time before they separated to execute the plan. "You too," Arin replied, his voice steady. "We'll finish this, together." The battle raged on as Arin made his way toward the heart of the enemy's base. Valen and the others fought valiantly, holding back the oncoming wave of enemies, but the organization's forces were relentless. The distraction was working, but the clock was ticking. Arin had to get inside, and he had to do it now. He breached the final set of doors, and there it was, the weapon. It was massive, a machine of death that hummed with power. Its mere presence sent a chill down his spine. This was the weapon that could wipe out entire systems, entire worlds. This was what the organization had worked for. Arin's heart raced as he moved closer, his mind focused on the task at hand. He knew what he had to do. It wasn't about heroics or saving the galaxy. It was about stopping the nightmare from becoming reality. He reached for the control panel, his fingers trembling slightly as he prepared to enter the final code that would deactivate the weapon. But as he did, a voice echoed through his mind. A memory from the past, one of the many that he had struggled to remember, but that had suddenly come rushing back. It was the voice of his mentor, the man who had trained him, the man who had taught him everything he knew. Remember, Arin, in the end, sacrifice is the greatest tool we have. To save the many, you must be willing to lose everything. The memory faded as the code was entered, and with it the machine powered down. The hum that had filled the air ceased, leaving nothing but the silence of victory. But victory came at a cost. As Arin returned to the team, his heart heavy with the weight of his decision, the ground began to shake. Valen and the others were still holding their ground, but it was clear that the battle wasn't over. The weapon had been disabled, but the organization was far from defeated. Arin's heart pounded in his chest as he realized they still had a fight ahead. Arin Valen shouted as she saw him, "We've almost got them! We're almost there!" But Arin knew the truth. They couldn't win without sacrifice. He had made his choice. He had already given everything. And now it was time to see if their sacrifices would truly bring about the peace they had fought for. The final battle raged around them. As Arin and Valen fought side by side, their movements fluid and synchronized, they knew that the outcome of this war would depend on their ability to finish what they had started. And in the end, Arin's sacrifice, his final choice to give everything for the greater good, might just be the key to turning the tide. They had come too far to fail now. The skies above the battlefield were dark, filled with thick smoke, as explosions rocked the ground beneath them. Arin and Valen led the charge, a determined fire burning in their eyes. This was it, the final assault against the underground organization that had been controlling their lives, their fate, and the fate of entire worlds. No more waiting. No more sneaking around in the shadows. They were going to hit them head on. The war had been long and grueling, but this was the moment they had been preparing for. A large coalition of allies, soldiers, and defectors from the organization had gathered ready to strike at the heart of the underground's power. They were going after their key bases, the places where the organization's true power lay. If they could destroy these strongholds, it would be the death blow for the entire organization. Arin's pulse quickened as he stared out at the sea of enemy forces ahead. Tanks rolled across the landscape, and armed soldiers moved in tight formations, ready to meet them in a fierce confrontation. The organization had always been one step ahead, but now Arin could feel the tide turning in their favor. They had the upper hand, but only just. "Are you ready?" Valen asked, her voice steady, though her eyes burned with the same intensity as Arin's. He nodded, though his mind raced with the enormity of the task ahead. "Ready as I'll ever be." Their forces advanced under a hail of gunfire, the battle beginning in a storm of chaos. Arin and Valen fought side by side, their movements synchronized as they cut through the enemy lines. Each blow they struck was a message the underground's reign of terror was ending today. But even as the tide seemed to shift in their favor, Arin couldn't shake the feeling that this battle would demand more than just their skill. It would demand sacrifices. And the price of victory was going to be steep. The clash was fierce. As Arin and Valen led their forces deeper into the heart of the organization's base, they found themselves facing an overwhelming enemy force. The organization had brought out their best, their most advanced soldiers, and they weren't going down without a fight. Every corner they turned, every step they took was met with resistance. "This is going to be tougher than we thought," Valen grunted, her voice gritting with the intensity of the battle. She cut down an enemy soldier with a swift, precise motion, but her eyes were scanning the battlefield, looking for the next threat. Arin's gaze swept across the field. He could see the damage they were inflicting, but he also saw the cost, his allies falling, their numbers dwindling. "We can't stop now. We have to press on. If we don't, all of this will have been for nothing." The battle raged on, with neither side willing to give an inch. Arin and Valen were relentless, cutting through the enemy forces with a precision born of years of training and shared purpose. But even as they made progress, the sense of impending disaster loomed overhead. The organization had always been prepared for every outcome. What if they were walking into a trap? What if this entire battle was part of the enemy's plan? Arin gritted his teeth as he drove forward, every instinct telling him that they were getting closer to the enemy's main stronghold. "We need to move faster. We're running out of time." Just when it seemed like victory was within their grasp, the unexpected happened. Arin was in the middle of a skirmish when he heard a familiar voice, one he hadn't expected to hear in the chaos of battle. a voice he thought he could trust. "Arin!" the voice shouted, coming from behind him. Turning, Arin's eyes widened in shock as he saw one of his trusted allies, someone who had fought beside him from the very beginning, holding a communicator in their hand. It was clear now. The plan had been compromised. "No!" Arin shouted, running toward them, but it was too late. The allies' face was twisted with guilt, but there was no remorse in their eyes. They had done what they had been sent to do: betray Arin and Valen, feed information to the organization, and betray their trust. You sold us out." Arin's voice was filled with disbelief, the hurt of the betrayal cutting deeper than any wound. He had trusted this person with his life. "I had no choice," the traitor said, their voice barely audible over the sound of gunfire. "They have my family. I had to do it." Arin's heart sank, but there was no time to dwell on the betrayal. The enemy was closing in, and the traitor was already retreating. "Take them down," Arin barked to his soldiers. "We can't let them escape." The betrayal had shaken him, but there was no time for hesitation. Valen was already moving, rallying their forces to push through the gap the traitor had created. Despite the loss of trust, Arin knew they couldn't afford to waste time grieving. This was war, and in war there would always be betrayal. The battle escalated into chaos. What was once a coordinated attack was now a frantic struggle for survival. The organization had anticipated their moves and used the betrayal to their advantage. Their forces grew stronger, and every victory Arin and Valen achieved came at a steep cost. Allies were falling. Arin could feel the weight of every death on his conscience. But they couldn't stop. They had come too far. The moment for hesitation had passed. Victory was within reach, but only if they could push through the final barrier. With a final push, they reached the heart of the organization's base, where the final weapon lay. But the cost of this victory was overwhelming. The battlefield was littered with bodies, both allies and enemies. The air was thick with smoke and the sound of dying screams. As the final shots were fired and the organization's stronghold crumbled, the silence that followed was deafening. Arin stood over the wreckage of the weapon, the key to the organization's power destroyed. But even as the weight of the victory settled in, the cost was clear. Their victory had come at the price of countless lives. Valen stood beside him, her face streaked with dirt and blood, her eyes haunted. "We did it, Arin," she whispered, though the words held little comfort. Arin nodded, his body aching, his mind numb. "We did. But at what cost?" he asked, his voice hollow. The faces of the fallen, his friends, his allies, were all that remained. What had they sacrificed for this victory? Had it been worth it? "We'll rebuild." Valen said, her voice firm, though the doubt in her eyes lingered. "But it will never be the same." Arin couldn't bring himself to speak. The battlefield was littered with the fallen, and in the distance the fires of victory still burned. But Arin knew the truth: the war may have been won, but the scars of this battle would last forever. As he looked around, his gaze landed on the horizon, where the first light of dawn began to break. The world would continue. But for Arin and Valen, the fight was far from over. The future was uncertain, and the cost of their victory had left them with more questions than answers. What now? Would this truly be the end, or was it only the beginning of something far darker? Only time would tell. The battle had ended. The dust had settled. The underground organization, which had controlled the galaxy from the shadows for so long, lay in ruins. Arin stood on the precipice of what had been the heart of their power, the remnants of their final weapon scattered around him. The facility was crumbling, collapsing from the destruction he and Valen had wrought. But even as the dust swirled around him, Arin knew that the real battle was not over. In his hands was the detonator, the final key to the destruction of everything the underground organization had worked for. His mind raced, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. He had come so far, faced so much, and yet this moment, this decision felt heavier than anything he had faced before. This was not just a fight for the galaxy's future. It was a fight for his own redemption, his own purpose. Arin had been created to be a weapon, a tool for the underground's twisted plans. But now, standing on the brink of their final defeat, he knew that the only way to stop them, for good, truly stop them, was to make the ultimate sacrifice. The detonation would destroy the entire facility, including the research, the personnel, the weapons, and most importantly, any hope the organization had of regaining control. "I've made my peace," Arin whispered to himself, his voice hoarse. He turned the detonator in his hand, his fingers trembling, but not from fear, rather from the overwhelming sense of finality that washed over him. He had given everything for this moment, his past, his memories, his life. The organization had taken everything from him, and now he would take everything from them in return. Valen's voice echoed in his ear as she approached him from behind her, breath ragged from the final battle. "Arin, what are you doing?" she demanded. She had seen the determination in his eyes, but the desperation now clouding her voice made it clear that she knew what he was about to do. You don't have to do this." But Arin's gaze remained fixed ahead, the horizon now bathed in the blood-red glow of the fire from the destroyed facility. "It's the only way." "They're gone, Valen. The organization, their weapons, everything, they'll be erased for good if I do this." "Arin," she pleaded, stepping closer to him, her hand gripping his arm. "There has to be another way. You can't die like this. You can't give up everything now." Arin looked at her, his eyes soft but resolute. He could see the pain in her eyes, the way her whole being trembled at the thought of losing him. He knew she wouldn't want him to make this choice. But the truth was, he couldn't live with himself if he didn't. "I've spent my life fighting," Arin said quietly. "And for what? To be a pawn, a tool for them. I fought for freedom, for a chance to give people a future. And now, this is the only way I can make sure that future exists. For you, for everyone else." The tears that filled Valen's eyes were unshed, but her voice cracked as she spoke, her grip tightening on his arm. "You'll die, Arin. I can't let you die." His hand reached for hers, squeezing it gently as he looked down at her. "You won't be alone, Valen. You have to keep going. You have to carry on what we started. You've always known what's right. Don't let my death be in vain. Promise me you'll continue the fight." Valen nodded, though her heart shattered in that moment. "I'll carry on your legacy, Arin. I'll make sure your sacrifice means something. But I can't lose you." "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice steady, but filled with the quiet resolve that had always defined him. "But this is what needs to happen. The war is over, Valen. We won." With the press of a button, the facility erupted in a violent blast. The walls trembled and the ground shook beneath their feet. Arin, standing alone in the heart of the destruction, watched as the firestorm began to spread. He felt no fear, no regret. His mission was complete. The underground organization had been vanquished, their weapons silenced forever. But as the flames roared around him, his vision began to fade. The pain in his chest grew unbearable, and his legs buckled beneath him. He fell to the ground, his breathing shallow as the world around him darkened. Valen rushed to his side, her voice desperate. "Arin, please stay with me." "You can't." She tried to lift him, but the weight of his body was too much. He smiled weakly, his hand lifting to touch her cheek. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his words barely audible. But Valen couldn't speak. She couldn't think. The tears that fell freely down her face were the only indication that she knew what was happening. She couldn't lose him. Not like this. Not after everything they had been through. But she also knew that Arin had chosen this, and there was no going back. "I'll make sure they know what you did," Valen vowed, her voice breaking. "You're not just a weapon, Arin. You're a hero. You're the reason this galaxy has a chance. I promise you, your legacy will live on." Arin's eyes fluttered one last time, his grip slackening in her hand as he slipped into unconsciousness, then finally death. The battle was won. The organization was no more. The galaxy could now begin to heal from the scars that had plagued it for so long. But the cost of victory was steep, and the loss of Arin hung heavily over Valen. For days, Valen couldn't bring herself to do anything. She wandered the battlefield, the desolate remnants of the final assault haunting her every step. The war was over, but the victory felt hollow. Arin was gone. And even though the galaxy had been freed from the underground's grip, it felt like something inside of her had died as well. She stood in front of Arin's makeshift grave, her hands clasped in front of her, as she whispered a prayer for him. Her mind kept replaying his final words, his final moments with her. He had died to give them all a future he would never see. But Valen knew that the only way to honor him was to continue his work to finish what they had started together. Arin's death was not the end. It was the beginning of something new. In the months that followed, Valen took up the mantle he had left behind. She rebuilt the resistance, bringing together those who had fought by their side to create a new, freer world. She became the symbol of hope, the embodiment of everything Arin had believed in. And though the world began to rebuild, there was still much work to do. The underground organization's influence had been vast, and even though it was gone, the remnants of its power still lingered in the shadows. Valen knew that the fight was far from over. Arin's sacrifice had bought them time, but the true battle for peace was just beginning. Arin's legacy lived on in the people he had touched in the world he had saved. The lessons he had imparted, sacrifice, honor, and the unyielding fight for what was right became the guiding principles for those who came after him. His story would be told for generations to come, not as the tale of a weapon, but as the tale of a man who chose to fight for a better world, even if it meant giving up his own life to do so. The galaxy was free, but its future would be shaped by the sacrifices made. And Arin would always be remembered as the hero who had given everything to ensure that freedom would one day be theirs. The underground organization had finally crumbled, its once formidable empire reduced to nothing more than rubble and ashes. Arin's death, though tragic, had been the catalyst for the final push that led to the organization's downfall. With their leader gone and their weapon destroyed, their power evaporated as quickly as it had been built. The remnants of their forces scattered across the galaxy, unable to regroup, unable to rise again. But even in victory, the cost was unbearable. Arin's sacrifice left a void that no amount of triumph could fill. Those who had fought alongside him, the resistance fighters, the defectors, the survivors, were left grappling with the painful reality that the heart of their cause was gone. Their leader, their symbol of hope and resilience, was no more. The question remained, had the organization truly been defeated, or had they merely been scattered like a shattered mirror, ready to reassemble itself in some dark corner of the galaxy? Despite the victory, Valen couldn't shake the haunting question. Had they truly won? The destruction of the underground organization's key infrastructure had crippled them, but Valen knew the extent of their reach. The organization had always been more than just a group of leaders and soldiers. It was a system, a network built on manipulation, deception, and control. It was a beast with many heads, and while the head had been severed, Valen couldn't ignore the possibility that some remnants, some fragment, might still survive. In the weeks following the battle, Valen and the remaining members of the resistance scoured the wreckage of the organization, ensuring that no trace of its power remained. Yet no matter how thorough they were, doubt lingered in Valen's heart. Could the organization truly be eradicated, or would its influence continue to linger in the shadows? As time passed, Valen realized that while the organization had been dismantled, the scars of their actions would take far longer to heal. Entire planets had been subjugated. Lives had been destroyed. Can one battle truly undo decades of tyranny? The task before them now was to rebuild what had been torn apart, to restore what was lost. But how could one begin to rebuild a galaxy fractured by years of oppression, loss, and betrayal? For Valen, the pain of losing Arin was something she could hardly put into words. He had been more than a comrade. He had been a friend, a mentor, and a symbol of everything they had fought for. His death was not just the end of a life, it was the end of the hope that had driven her through every battle, every sacrifice. And now with him gone, Valen found herself standing alone on the precipice of the future, uncertain of where to go next. At first, Valen didn't know how to cope. She felt like a part of her had been ripped away, and in its place there was an emptiness she couldn't fill. How could she continue the fight without Arin by her side? How could she face the battles ahead when the one person who had shared her burden was no longer there to help carry it? Yet despite the overwhelming pain, Valen understood that she couldn't stop. She couldn't give up. Arin had fought so hard for this future, for the freedom they were now beginning to taste. To honor his memory, she had to continue. She had to finish what they had started. Her grief was something she carried with her every day, but it wasn't something that could break her. It would shape her, yes, but it wouldn't define her. The fight was bigger than both of them, and now it was up to her to ensure that the sacrifice Arin made wasn't in vain. As the days turned into weeks, Valen's resolve grew stronger. She stood before the remaining leaders of the resistance, rallying them with her words, her vision of a world rebuilt from the ashes of tyranny. Her speech was filled with fire, but there was also a quiet sorrow in her eyes. sorrow for the loss of the man who had believed in this vision alongside her. Arin's death was not just the end of a man, Valen said, her voice steady, though it carried the weight of everything she felt. It was the end of a system that sought to control us. It was the end of a future built on fear. We are free now, and we will make sure that the future we build is one that honors everything Arin fought for. Her words resonated with those who had fought beside her, the people who had watched Arin die to ensure they could live in a world of freedom. His sacrifice was their motivation, their guiding light. But the question remained, how would they honor it? How would they ensure that their struggle was never forgotten? That Arin's legacy lived on in a galaxy that had suffered so long? In the months that followed, Valen became the figurehead of a new movement, one that sought to heal the galaxy and rebuild the societies that had been torn apart by the Underground's influence. But despite the progress they made, Valen couldn't shake the feeling that the scars of war would never truly heal. The damage was too deep, the pain too great. Arin's death, however painful, became a rallying cry. His sacrifice inspired countless individuals across the galaxy. It became the bedrock of the new society they sought to build, a society rooted in freedom, justice, and the belief that no one should ever again have to suffer under the control of another. Arin's name became synonymous with hope, and as the years passed, his story was told and retold, becoming a legend that would inspire generations to come. The question that lingered, however, was whether that hope would truly last. Could the new galaxy shaped by Arin's sacrifice stand the test of time? Or was the world they had won simply another step in an ongoing cycle of power and revolution? Valen had her doubts, but she knew one thing: Arin had died to make sure they had a future to fight for. And that was a future she would never take for granted. As she stood overlooking a new rebuilt city, one of the first to rise from the ashes, Valen couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. There were still many challenges ahead, many wounds left to heal, but she knew they were on the right path. The galaxy was no longer ruled by the Underground. It was a galaxy of possibilities. And as Valen stared out at the horizon, the first rays of dawn breaking through the sky, she whispered a promise to herself and to Arin. We will make this world better. We will honor your sacrifice by living the way you always wanted us to. And in that moment, she felt a sense of peace, knowing that Arin's legacy would not just live on in the stories told about him, but in the world that was being rebuilt, the world that had been saved by his sacrifice. With the Underground organization finally defeated and their influence scattered, Valen and the remaining members of the Resistance found themselves at a crossroads. The fight for freedom was over, but the real work was only just beginning. As the dust of war settled and the immediate threats faded, there remained a tangled web of mysteries, hidden truths, unresolved questions, and the dark legacy of the Underground organization. The pieces of the puzzle were still out of reach, and only by uncovering them could they fully understand the extent of the damage done and perhaps find a way to prevent history from repeating itself. Valen had always suspected that the Underground organization was more than just a rogue faction with political ambitions. There was something deeper, something far more sinister at play. As she sat in a dimly lit room filled with maps and reports, the realization hit her: the organization wasn't just a criminal empire, it had roots that stretched far beyond what they had seen. What are we missing? Valen muttered to herself as she sifted through the remaining data. The information they had uncovered so far had been essential in dismantling the organization, but it felt incomplete. She looked up to see one of her most trusted allies, Leandro, standing nearby, his brow furrowed in thought. They were too careful, Leandro said, his voice tinged with frustration. There's more here than we know. Some of their highest-level operations were hidden in layers we didn't even realize existed. Valen nodded. She had always known that the Underground organization was adept at staying out of sight, operating in shadows that they couldn't even begin to track. But now it was time to unearth those shadows and expose them for what they were. We need to find out where it all began, Valen said, determination in her voice. This isn't just about stopping them. It's about understanding them. We need to know what fueled this empire, who was behind it, and why they did what they did. The more they dug into the remnants of the organization's infrastructure, the clearer it became the Underground was not just a group of power-hungry individuals. It was a machine designed to control, to manipulate, and to break those who opposed it. The traces of their influence had spread into every corner of society, governments, military units, corporations. They had been an invisible force pulling the strings from behind the scenes. But now Valen had a new mission to find the roots of the tree and uproot them completely. As Valen delved deeper into the past, she uncovered an even darker truth. The underground's manipulation of society wasn't just about creating power, it was about controlling history itself. The organization had been involved in experiments, genetic modifications, and psychological conditioning on an unimaginable scale. They had created a society of puppets, and the few who had escaped their grasp, like Arin and Valen, were anomalies in a carefully constructed system. The underground's real goal had never been about political domination. It was about absolute, unshakable control over the human mind, the human spirit. Arin was one of their greatest failures, Valen whispered, as she read through a report detailing Arin's origins. The organization had created him, manipulated him, and used him as a weapon, but they had never expected him to break free. The realization hit Valen hard. The man she had fought beside the man she had loved and lost was never truly free. He had been their creation, their experiment. And yet against all odds, he had turned against them. Valen closed the report with a heavy heart. Arin had been their greatest weapon, and yet he had become their greatest undoing. His sacrifice had ended the organization, but it had also left her with a feeling of profound loss. She felt the weight of his absence every day, like a shadow that lingered at the edge of her consciousness. As the resistance forces began to regroup and rebuild Valen, and her allies worked tirelessly to piece together the past, they knew that the work ahead of them would not be easy. The damage caused by the underground's reign stretched far and wide. Entire communities had been manipulated and brainwashed. They had not only destroyed lives but altered the very fabric of society. And now it was up to Valen and those who fought alongside her to rebuild that fabric. The first steps in rebuilding were crucial. Valen knew that they couldn't simply erase the damage done. They had to rebuild trust. They had to restore hope. But how could they, when the scars of war were so deep? How could they heal a galaxy that had been torn apart by betrayal, lies, and manipulation? "It's not going to be easy," Leandra said, standing beside her as they surveyed the progress of the newly formed government. "We've taken down the organization, but the people are still broken. They don't trust us yet. They've seen too much." Valen nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "They will. We just have to prove to them that we're different, that we're not here to control them, to manipulate them. We're here to rebuild." But even as Valen spoke the words, a deep uncertainty lingered in her heart. The people had been deceived for so long. Could they truly trust in the new world that Valen and the others were trying to create? Despite the victories, the absence of Arin weighed heavily on Valen. She had lost her partner, her closest ally, and a piece of herself. But in his death, he had left her with something invaluable, a legacy, a reason to keep fighting. She had to honor that. She had to honor him. His death couldn't be in vain, but the loss was not just personal. Arin's sacrifice had been the catalyst for a shift in her own beliefs, in her own purpose. She was no longer just a fighter against oppression. She was now a leader, someone who had to guide a fractured world towards something better. But the questions never stopped. What would this new world look like? Would it be better than the one they had left behind, or would they merely be setting the stage for another war? Valen couldn't answer that. Not yet. But what she did know was this: she would carry on just as Arin had wanted. And in time, she would ensure that the future they had fought for would be a reality, not just a dream. The days that followed were filled with both hope and uncertainty. As Valen and the others worked to rebuild, they knew that their fight was far from over. The underground had left a lasting imprint on the galaxy, one that wouldn't fade easily. But with each step forward, they took with them the lessons learned from Arin's sacrifice. The world was changing slowly but surely. The underground was gone, but the journey ahead was long. And in the quiet moments of reflection, Valen could almost feel Arin's presence beside her. His fight, his sacrifice, his legacy, it was alive in her and in everyone who had stood by him. And as she moved forward, she knew that the best way to honor him was to keep pushing, keep fighting for a better future. Arin's death had been the end of a chapter, but it was also the beginning of something new. And with each step Valen took, she carried his memory with her, his strength, his conviction, his belief in something better. She would make sure the world knew his name and that his sacrifice would never be forgotten. The war was over. The underground organization was no more. Its grip on the galaxy had finally been shattered, its power extinguished in a storm of fire and destruction. But for Arin, the cost of this victory was far too great. Standing alone amid the ruins of the battle with the remnants of the weapons still smoldering in the background, Arin knew that his time had come. He had given everything, fought to the very end, but now he could feel his body failing him. The injuries from the battle, the toll of years of conflict, and the sheer weight of the choices he had made, Arin knew he would not survive this. He had done his part. The final weapon was destroyed. The underground organization was vanquished. But at what cost? The sacrifices were countless, and the most painful of them all was his own. He could feel the death creeping closer with every passing second, but his resolve was unshaken. He had made a promise to Valen, to his comrades, and to the galaxy itself. And now it was time to fulfill it. Arin stood at the heart of the devastation, looking over the battlefield where the final battle had taken place. The cries of the fallen echoed in his ears, and the smoke from the destroyed facilities lingered in the air. He had lived for this moment, for the end of the underground's reign, but it had come at the highest price imaginable. "I've done what I needed to do," Arin muttered to himself. His voice was weak, his body trembling, but there was a sense of finality in his words. He had come to terms with it. This was how it had to be. His sacrifice would ensure that the galaxy would be free and that the underground would never rise again. He had been more than a soldier. He had been a weapon, a tool created by the organization. But now in his final moments, he was more than that. He was a hero, and heroes sometimes had to make the ultimate sacrifice. As Arin activated the final sequence that would destroy the core of the organization, he felt a wave of relief wash over him. The detonator in his hand was his last act, his final decision. He had made sure the job was done. The organization's leadership was decimated, and its control over the galaxy was gone. But in that moment, as the countdown began, Arin felt his strength waning. His heart was heavy with the knowledge that he would not live to see the aftermath of his actions. And then it happened. A deafening explosion ripped through the facility, and Arin felt the earth shake beneath him. The final weapon was gone. The organization was finished. But as the shock waves from the blast reverberated, Arin collapsed to the ground. His vision blurred and his breath became shallow. He knew this was it, the end of his journey. In the aftermath of the explosion, Valen rushed to Arin's side, her heart racing, as she saw the bloodied figure of her closest ally lying unconscious. The battle was won, but the cost was unbearable. Arin had saved them all, but now he was slipping away. Arin Valen shouted, her voice breaking, as she knelt beside him. She shook him gently, but his eyes remained closed, his breathing shallow. She could feel the faint pulse in his wrist, but it was weakening with each passing second. "Stay with me, Arin. You can't leave me now." But Arin's eyes flickered open just enough to meet her gaze. There was no fear in his eyes, only a quiet peace. "It's done," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's over. You have to keep going, Valen. You have to carry on." Valen's heart shattered at his words. "I can't do this without you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You promised me, Arin. You promised we'd get through this together." Arin smiled weakly, his fingers brushing against her hand. "You're stronger than you think. You always have been. This was never just my fight. It was ours. And now it's yours too." With that, his grip slackened and his eyes closed for the final time. Valen sat there for a long moment, unable to move, unable to accept that the man who had fought by her side, who had given everything for this moment, was truly gone. The weight of his sacrifice pressed down on her, and for the first time in her life, Valen felt lost. The aftermath of Arin's death was a mixture of victory and grief. The resistance had won. The underground organization was no more its leaders, dead, its forces scattered. But for Valen and the remaining members of the resistance, the loss of Arin overshadowed any sense of triumph. The battle may have been won, but the war had taken a devastating toll. Valen, despite her grief, knew that she had to continue the fight. Arin's death had been the final act in their struggle, but it wasn't the end. The galaxy needed rebuilding. The people needed guidance, and Valen had to ensure that Arin's sacrifice wasn't in vain. Valen's first act after Arin's death was to honor his memory. She gathered the surviving members of the resistance and delivered a speech that would resonate across the galaxy. Arin gave everything for this cause. He fought for our future, for our freedom, and now we must honor him by ensuring that his sacrifice is never forgotten. She paused, her voice heavy with emotion. We will rebuild. We will create a new world, one that Arin would have been proud of. But we can't do it alone. We must all fight just as Arin did to ensure that no one else ever has to sacrifice everything again. The resistance rallied around her, inspired by Arin's legacy, and together they set about rebuilding the shattered remnants of their world. They worked to restore order, to bring peace to the galaxy, and to ensure that the underground's influence would never again take root. The legacy of Arin lived on in the people he had protected, in the world he had saved. His sacrifice had changed the course of history, and though he was gone, his actions would echo through time. The resistance had won, but the true battle was just beginning, the battle to rebuild, to heal, and to create a future that Arin had died to make possible. As Valen stood on the edge of the battlefield looking out at the new world she and Arin had fought for, she knew that the journey wasn't over. The galaxy had been freed, but there was still work to be done. And with Arin's memory in her heart, Valen was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Arin's death had been a terrible loss, but his sacrifice had given the galaxy the chance to be free. And Valen would carry on that fight not just for herself, but for the man who had shown her what it truly meant to fight for something greater than yourself. Arin's sacrifice had been the spark that ignited a new era. His legacy would never fade. The galaxy was free, but the road to lasting peace was long. Valen and the others would have to carry his memory forward, ensuring that the darkness of the underground would never again cast its shadow over their world. And as they did, they would find the strength to rebuild, to heal, and to honor the man who had given everything to give them that chance. The war was over, but the scars it had left on the galaxy ran deep. The underground organization, the silent puppeteer that had pulled the strings of so many lives, had finally been destroyed. But with its fall came a new challenge, rebuilding a shattered society. The task ahead was immense, and for many it seemed insurmountable. There was no handbook on how to rebuild after such an all-encompassing war, and the wounds, both physical and emotional, were still fresh. As Valen stood in front of a crowd gathered in the capital of a newly liberated planet, she couldn't help but feel a mix of hope and uncertainty. The galaxy had been freed from tyranny, but the process of rebuilding it, of restoring order and peace, would take time, perhaps longer than anyone expected. "We've won," Valen spoke, her voice carrying across the plaza. "But the battle doesn't end with the fall of the underground. The true test begins now as we rebuild what has been destroyed. We have a chance to make things right, to create a new world built on freedom and justice." She paused, the weight of the responsibility settling on her shoulders. She knew that her words, no matter how powerful, wouldn't change the reality of the situation. The galaxy was broken, and the pieces couldn't just be put back together with a speech. They needed action. They needed strength. They needed unity. The immediate aftermath of the war was chaotic. The underground's grip on the galaxy had been all-encompassing, and the vacuum left by their absence had thrown many regions into disarray. Local governments, once under the thumb of the organization, were struggling to reassert control, while groups once loyal to the underground had splintered into factions, some seeking power for themselves, others simply trying to survive. Valen and the other leaders of the resistance knew they couldn't rebuild the galaxy overnight. It would take years, decades perhaps, to heal the wounds, but they had to start somewhere. And for Valen, that meant focusing on one key issue: unity. They had to bring people together. The different races, cultures, and societies that had been divided by the underground's manipulation had to find common ground if they were going to move forward. One of the first challenges Valen faced was negotiating peace between the various factions. The war had pitted groups against each other, and now, after the battle was won, it was time to figure out how to live together. The question of leadership was a delicate one. Who would guide the galaxy? Could the new leaders be trusted not to fall into the same traps of corruption and power that the underground had set? Valen worked tirelessly to forge alliances, to create a council made up of representatives from every faction, from every world that had been affected by the Underground's reign. It wasn't easy. Old prejudices died hard and the scars of war were still too raw for many. But Valen knew that this was the only way. The road ahead would be difficult, but if they could create a coalition that worked together, they could avoid the mistakes of the past. While the galaxy struggled to rebuild, Valen was also faced with her own personal challenges. The loss of Arin weighed heavily on her. He had been her closest ally, her confidant, and the one person she could always count on. Now she had to find a way to continue without him. How could she carry on the fight without the man who had sacrificed everything for the cause? As she sat alone in her office, staring out at the city below, Valen allowed herself a moment of reflection. Arin's death had been a devastating blow, not just for her, but for the entire resistance. He had been the heart of their efforts, but his sacrifice, his legacy, was something that Valen could not ignore. She had made a promise to him to continue the fight to honor what he had given them. And now, as the new leader of this fractured galaxy, she would do just that. But even as she moved forward, there were moments when Valen questioned herself. Could she really do this alone? Would she ever find peace in a world where Arin's absence was so profoundly felt? She knew she couldn't do it alone, not completely. The weight of leadership was heavy, and though she had the support of her comrades, the loss of Arin left a gap that no one else could fill. His memory was a constant companion, one that would drive her forward even in the darkest moments. As the galaxy began to rebuild, Valen and her fellow leaders focused on the pressing issues that would shape the future. The creation of a new government was one of the first priorities. The old systems, the ones that had been corrupted by the Underground, had to be completely dismantled. A new fairer system had to take its place, one that would prevent any one group from gaining too much power. It wasn't just about punishing the Underground's former leaders. It was about ensuring that no one ever again had the opportunity to manipulate and control the galaxy. One of the most difficult decisions Valen had to make was regarding the future of the former Underground soldiers. Many of them had been coerced into service, manipulated by the organization's control. They were not all evil, but their actions had consequences. Valen knew that a simple execution of the former soldiers would not solve the problem. Instead, she opted for a program of rehabilitation and reintegration, one that would give them the chance to prove themselves as members of a free society. The challenge was enormous. But if the galaxy was to heal, everyone had to be given the chance to start anew. Valen's leadership would be tested in these moments of difficult choices. The goal was not to erase the past, but to learn from it, to ensure that history did not repeat itself. As Valen and the others worked to rebuild, they faced an even greater challenge, the question of unity between the galaxy's various races and factions. The Underground had sown distrust and division among them, and now it was time to heal those wounds. There were moments of progress, alliances forged, communities rebuilt, but there were also moments of tension when old prejudices and mistrust resurfaced. Valen knew that this was inevitable. The scars of war couldn't be erased in a single generation, but she also knew that if the galaxy was to move forward, it would take time and patience. The new society would not be perfect, but it would be built on the principles of equality, fairness, and freedom. In the end, the galaxy would become stronger, not because of the absence of war, but because of the lessons learned from it. The people of the galaxy had been through hell, and yet they had survived. They had learned to fight for each other, to stand together in the face of adversity. And though the road ahead was still long and uncertain, Valen was determined to lead them forward, to ensure that Arin's sacrifice had not been in vain. The future was unwritten, but it was theirs to shape. The galaxy had been freed from tyranny, and now it was time for its people to reclaim their destiny. And in that, Valen found hope. The legacy of Arin would live on in the world they built, in the lives they rebuilt, and in the future they would create. The war had ended, but its echoes still resonated through the hearts and minds of those who had survived. The galaxy, free at last from the Underground's suffocating grasp, was left with the heavy task of rebuilding, of picking up the shattered pieces and forging a new future from them. Valen stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking the landscape that stretched below her, an endless expanse of new beginnings. The horizon was painted with the first rays of dawn, symbolizing the promise of a new day, of a new world. Behind her, the city of their victory was being rebuilt, its foundations strong but fragile. The scars of war were still visible, but with every brick laid, every structure restored, there was a quiet hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, they could make this world a better place than the one that had been left behind. Valen closed her eyes, taking in the wind, the coolness of the morning air. It was hard to imagine what life would be like in this new world. The people had tasted freedom, and they had paid dearly for it. Arin's death had been the final sacrifice, the ultimate price for a future they might never fully see. But Valen knew that his sacrifice would not be in vain. It couldn't be. As she stood there, lost in thought, Valen was joined by Leandro, her trusted ally, and the voice of reason in their most trying times. He stood quietly beside her, taking in the view of the city as well. "It's hard to believe, isn't it?" Leandro said softly. "Everything we've been through, everything we've lost. And yet, we're still standing." Valen nodded. "Arin's gone, but his legacy is here in all of us. We're standing because of him, because of the sacrifices we made, the battles we fought together." Leandro glanced at her, his eyes filled with both grief and gratitude. "But what about the future, Valen? Will it be enough? Will people remember what we've done, what Arin did? Will they honor it?" Valen's heart ached at the thought. Arin had given everything for this victory, but would the generations that followed remember the cost? Would they remember the lessons of the war, the lessons of freedom and justice? "I believe they will," Valen said quietly. "We're going to make sure they do. We'll make sure that his memory, his legacy, becomes the foundation of this new world." As time passed, Valen and the leaders of the newly formed government worked tirelessly to rebuild, to create something that Arin would have been proud of. The old systems of oppression, the ones that the underground had so carefully put in place, were torn down, replaced with a more equitable structure, one where the voices of the people could finally be heard. But with every step forward, there was the looming fear that history could repeat itself. The galaxy had been free, but for how long would they find themselves facing new threats? New organizations that would rise to fill the power vacuum left by the underground. Would the cycle of oppression begin again? No one could say for certain. But Valen, alongside the other leaders, made a vow that they would not let the mistakes of the past dictate the future. The fight for freedom wasn't over. It had merely shifted into a new phase. The people of the galaxy, once torn apart by fear and division, began to heal. Valen and the council worked with the various factions, finding common ground, rebuilding trust. But the road was long. Some still carried the scars of their past, both physical and emotional, and healing wasn't something that could be achieved overnight. For Valen, the hardest part was not the rebuilding, but the absence of Arin. Every decision she made, every step she took, was colored by the memory of his sacrifice, but she couldn't allow herself to be consumed by grief. The galaxy needed her, needed them all to carry forward the torch of hope that Arin had ignited. As the years went on, Valen saw the fruits of their labor. The galaxy was changing. The wounds of war were slowly healing, and new generations were rising unaware of the full extent of the sacrifices that had been made. They only knew that they had been given a chance to live in a world without fear, without oppression. But Valen knew that they would have to be vigilant. The fight for freedom was never truly over. Valen often thought of the people who had followed Arin into battle. Those who had fought, bled, and died beside him. They had all paid a price, and now they carried on his legacy. But as the galaxy moved into this new era, Valen couldn't help but wonder if the memory of Arin and the lessons of the war would fade with time. Would the generations that followed forget the true cost of their freedom, or would they remember? And then there was the question of whether they could maintain the peace they had fought so hard for. Could they prevent new threats from rising, new organizations from forming in the shadows? Valen couldn't say for certain. She didn't know if the galaxy would remain united or if new divisions would form. But she knew this, they had to try. They had to build a world where the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. Arin's legacy, though not immortal in the physical sense, lived on in every decision that was made, in every life that was lived in freedom. The galaxy was free, but the fight to protect that freedom would always be ongoing. Arin had given everything for that future, and it was now up to the people he had fought for to ensure that his sacrifice was not in vain. The galaxy was changing, and for the first time in a long time, Valen could see the glimmer of a brighter future. It was still uncertain, still fragile, but it was theirs, and that was enough. As she stood on the balcony of the newly established council hall, overlooking the thriving city below, Valen whispered to herself, "We did it, Arin. We did it for you." The wind carried her words as if the galaxy itself was listening, and in that moment Valen felt a sense of peace. Arin was gone, but his spirit, the courage, the selflessness, would always be a part of this new world they were building. And that Valen realized was the true legacy. The future was unwritten, but the hope for something better had been planted, and the people would carry that hope forward. The galaxy was free, and in that freedom there was a promise that they would never forget the cost of their liberty. And as long as that promise lived on the memory of Arin, and the fight for a brighter tomorrow would endure. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the newly rebuilt cities, Valen stood at the edge of the balcony, looking out at the world Arin had fought for. The war was over, the underground defeated, but the true work had only just begun. There were still wounds to heal, still scars to mend, but there was also hope. A hope that had been ignited by sacrifice by those who had fought for a world free from tyranny. Valen's heart still carried the weight of Arin's loss, but as she looked out at the vibrant, thriving cities, she felt a flicker of peace. The world was no longer under the shadow of the underground, and the future, though uncertain, was theirs to shape. Arin's sacrifice had given them that chance. His legacy lived on in every rebuilt home, every hand extended in friendship, and every promise made to protect the freedom they had fought so hard to win. For Valen, the journey wasn't over. The galaxy had been freed, but the fight for a better future, one that Arin would have been proud of, was a battle she would continue to face day by day. She had promised him she would carry on, and she would, because in his memory and his spirit she found the strength to keep moving forward. And as the first stars began to appear in the night sky, Valen knew that no matter how long it took, the world would heal. Arin's legacy would guide them, and their future would be brighter than ever.